Vrajajanaranjana Yasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Yasodananda Vrajajanaranjana Bhagavatam ki Rantara Shima Bhagavatam ki Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatyam Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye Nasta Praeshu Abhadresu Nityam Bhagavatam Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhakti Bhagavati Naistiki Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 3 Chapter 5 The Guru is taught with Maitreya, and we're on the half-century verse, text number 50. It's on the board.
Yes, Prabhu. You can start, Prabhu.
Twamna Suranam Asi Sanvayanam Twamna Suranam Asi Sanvayanam Kutasta Aja Purusha Puranaha Kutasta Aja Purusha Purana Tvam Deva Satyam Guna Kama Yona Tvam Deva Satyam Guna Kama Yona Retas Twajayam Kavim Adade Jaha Retas Twajayam Kavim Adade Jaha Tvam Nasurnam Asti Sanvayanam Kutasta Aja Purusha Puranaha Deva Satyam Gunakama Yona
Satyam Gunakarma Yona
Retas Tvajayam Kavimad Adadejaha
Pretastvajayam Kavimada Dejaha
Svamna Suranam Asti Sanvajayam
Vamna Surana Masisan Mayanam
Kutasta Aja Purusha Purana
Dastvamaja Purusha Purana
Vandeva Sakyam Gunakama Yonam
Deva Satyam Gunakarma Yonam
Vetas Tvajayam Kavim Adadejaha
Pretastvajayam Kavimada Dejaha
Someone else want?
Vamna Surana Masisan Vayanam
Nasuranam Asisan Vayanam
Utasta Adya Vishapranaha
Kutasta Aja Purusha Puranaha
Deva Satyam Gunakarma Yonam
Tvamdeva Satyam Gunakama Yonam
Pretastvajayam Kavimada Dejaha
Vetas Tvajayam Kavam Adadejaha. You wanted to chant it out?
That thing is in the middle, that
Pictures of Lord Chaitanya.
casting
Is
out.
that right there? Yes. Samna Suranam Asisan Vayanam
Nasuranam Asisan Vayanam
Kutasta Jahapura Shaprana
Kutasta Aja Purusha Puranaha
Deva Satyam Gunakama Yano
Tvamdeva Sakyam Gunakama Yona
Lita Tvajam Yam Kavim Gadaheja
Jayam Kavim Adadejaha. Twam, your lordship,
Your Lordship,
Naha,
Nama,
Avad,
of us,
Suranam,
Sudanam,
of the demigod,
of the demigods,
Asi,
Asi,
you are,
you are,
Sa'anvajanam,
Saadvayanam
with different gradations.
different gradations.
Kutasta,
Udasta,
one who is unchanged.
one who is unchanged,
Ajaha,
Ajaha,
without any superior.
without any superior,
Purushaha,
Purushaha,
the founder person.
Founder person.
Puranaha,
Purana,
the oldest who has no ever founder.
the oldest who has
oldest who had no founder.
Twam,
Dvam,
you,
you,
Deva,
Deva,
O Lord,
O Lord,
Sakyam,
Shakya,
onto the energy.
unto the energy.
Gunakama Yona,
Gunakama
onto the cause of the material modes in activity.
unto the cause of material modes and activities.
Retaha,
Retaha,
semen of birth.
Sinambar,
Two,
Two,
indeed,
indeed,
Ajayam,
Ajayam,
for begetting.
for beginning,
Kavim,
Kavim,
the total living entity.
the total living entities,
Adade,
Adade,
initiated.
initiated,
Ajaha,
Ajaha,
one who is
One.
unborn.
one who is unborn.
You are the original personal founder of all the demigods and the order of different gradations. Yet you are the oldest and unchanged. O Lord, you have no source or superior. You have impregnated the external energy with the semen of the total living entities. Yet you are unborn. Please repeat. You are the original personal founder
you are the original personal founder
of all the demigods
of all the demigods,
and of the orders of different gradations.
the orders of different gradations.
Yet you are the oldest and unchangeable.
You are the oldest and unchangeable.
O Lord,
O Lord,
you have no source or superior.
you
You have no source superior.
You have impregnated the external energy
You have impregnated the external energy,
with the semen of the total living entity.
the semen of the total living entity.
Yet you are unborn.
Yet you are unborn.
Srila Prabhupada's divine purport.
Judge your
The Lord, the original person, is the Father of all ever living beings. Beginning from Brahma, the personality from whom all ever living entities in different gradations of species are generated. Yet the Supreme Father has no ever Father. Every one of the living entities of all grades, up to Brahma, the original creature of the universe, is begotten by a father, but he, the Lord, has no father. When he descends on the material plane, out of his causeless mercy, he accepts one of his great devotees as his father, to keep pace with the rules of the material world. But since he is the Lord, he is always independent, choosing who will be his father. For example, the Lord came out of a pillar, and his incarnation is Nrsimhadev. And by the Lord's causeless mercy, Ahalya came out of a stone by the touch of the lotus feet of his incarnation, is Lord Ramachandra. He is also the companion of every living entity as the super soul. But he is unchanged. The living entity changes his body in the material world. But even when the Lord is in the material world, he is ever unchanged. That is his prerogative. It's confirmed in Bhagavad Gita chapter 14, verse number 3. The Lord impregnates the external or material energy, and thus the total living entities later come out in different gradations, beginning from Brahma, the first demigod, down to an insignificant ant. All gradations of living entities are manifest by Brahma and the external energy, but the Lord is the original Father of everyone. The relationship of every living being with the Supreme Lord is certainly one of son and father, and not one of equality. Sometimes in love, the son is more than the father, but the relationship of father and son is one of the superior and the subordinate. Every living entity, however great he may be, even up to the demigods like Brahma and Indra, is an eternally subordinate servitor of the Supreme Father. The Mahatattva principle is the generating source of all the modes of material nature. And the living entities take birth in the material world in bodies supplied by the mother, material nature, in terms of their previous work. The body is a gift of material nature, but the soul is originally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai, Srila Prabhupada. I offer my respectful obeisances onto the lotus feet of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, who has opened our eyes with the torch of knowledge. When will Rupa Goswami Prabhupada who has established within the material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give us shelter under his lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In Srila Prabhupada's pranam mantra, he says that he has come to eradicate the impersonalism and voidism in the Western world. In the Western world, people find it hard to believe that there's a supreme person. They may worship God as such, but it's unsure, depending on the theologian and depending on the individual person, whether he's a person. And certainly they don't think of him as an ordinary person. But he is a person for some. And for others, he's impersonal. He's just like in the Vedic conception of Brahman. He's just spirit. He's just light. And from him everything comes. And he's all-pervading consciousness. And he has a voice. And he can make whatever he wants to happen. And he's generally in Christian theology, he's a judge, ultimately. So God has to assume this role of judging souls, especially human beings. It's unsure how they think of lower creatures. And of course in Islam, he's pretty impersonal because it's sacrilegious to think of him as a person because they tend to think of people as humans and even believe that the human reincarnates in heaven, something like a human being, but with celestial pleasure. At least that's what I've gotten out of their presentation of the truth. And the Buddhists, quite the opposite, but sort of not exactly close to impersonalism, which is also there in the Vedic conception due to Sankara. I mean, previously the sages understood that the Lord had an orator that was all-pervading everywhere, is the all-pervading light, and the spiritual worlds and the material worlds were situated in this light. This light is everywhere, it comes from the Lord. They understood that was the impersonal, eternal aspect of the Lord. But Sankara, he could not accept certain expansions of the Lord, and therefore he contradicted Vyasadev's Vedanta Sutra, that the absolute truth is that source from whom everything comes. And he took it in an impersonal way. The absolute truth is that source from which everything comes. He made it impersonal, especially his disciples, because he would also teach to ultimately surrender to Govinda, and he also wrote very wonderful verses about the Bhagavad Gita. But his disciples passed it all down in a very, very impersonal way. And it served the purpose. He was very potent because he is none other than the very unique expansion of the Lord and the greatest of the devotees of the Lord Shiva himself. And he had a mission that had to be fulfilled on the earth. And that was to push the Buddhists who had become dominant, especially after the reign of the great Emperor Ashoka, who established Buddhism in India as sort of a state religion. He accepted Buddhism. And Buddhism came from a Kshatriya king who had converted to a renunciate and couldn't find satisfaction in the Vedas because the priests by that time in Kali Yuga were performing lots of animal sacrifices, apparently for simply the pleasure of people, rather than for the pleasure of the Devas and pleasure of the Supreme Lord, nor had they the power to bring these creatures back to life. And so therefore, Buddha rejected all that. And they couldn't accept that. They said these are Vedic rituals, it has to be accepted. We are doing this on the authority of the Vedas. So Buddha rejected the Vedas and taught everyone his eightfold noble path, considered the middle path, whereby one was detached from everything material. And this way one actually becomes happy and dismantles the material existence. And somehow or other the conclusion is that they merge into this all-pervading void, which actually has a Sanskrit term. A lot of their works in Sanskrit, and what's that other language?
Pali.
Yeah, Pali they use. So it all grew up there in India and became prominent when this one Kshatriya king accepted it as his religion and made it a state religion. He saw the pain of warfare and how men were simply killed for the pleasure of the emperor to control some lands, control some people, to exert his government in other places, and that the ladies and the children were put into so much difficulty for this. And this philosophy of Buddha, this nonviolent philosophy, because Buddhism, something like Jainism in India, it was established as nonviolent, is practically the main principle, which is also a principle in Vedic culture, but a sort of sub-religious principle. It's something that's expected, whereas it became a big emphasis in Buddhism and in Jainism also. But ultimately, the perfection of life wasn't seen as attaining to the personal planet of the Lord to live with Him personally, but the Lord wasn't only made impersonal, but the Lord was made into a nothing. The ultimate truth being when we dismantled the material, which is something but temporary and illusory, according to both the impersonalists and the voidists. But the voidists saying that when we dismantle it all, we merge into the nirvana, or the all-pervading nothingness. And we become nothing, and this nothingness, we find somehow there's some satisfaction, even though there's nothingness. That's why you always see these jokes about the Buddhists, where for their birthday, they get a big bag of nothing, because that's their ultimate conception. So anyway, this Sankaracharya, he pushed by the power of his speech and writing, he defeated the philosophy of the Buddhists, and they went on the other side of the Himalayan mountains into Tibet, which was Tibet at that time, and into China, and eventually into Korea and Japan, and even into Vietnam and Cambodia, and those places. Where there was some Vedic teachings, especially in Cambodia, we see that big temple. There was one powerful Kshatriya king, but later it was taken over by the Buddhists, and then it just went into back to the forest, practically speaking. So Prabhupada, he came to establish the personality of Godhead here in our Western world, which doesn't identify with Sankaracharya, nor with the Buddhists, although Buddhism has a popularity in the West, and so does the impersonal teachings of Sankara's Vedanta. But that became somewhat popular not until the 20th century, in the 1900s. It gradually gained some popularity, and is somewhat popular today, because it really fits in with a lot of conceptions of atheistic modern science, where everything comes out of nothing somehow or other, and that somehow or other the material energy generates consciousness, and when we die, they don't give any emphasis to it. That, when you die, it's over with, and it's all right if you have some faith. They don't care what your faith is, and the Buddhist conception kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of that. And the impersonal conception, if they want to believe in all-pervading light is the source of everything, then they generally don't have no qualms about that. But as soon as you say a supreme person, then they all look at you like you believe in myths, like you believe in ancient Greek and Roman myths, or Hindu myths, all sorts of of ancient civilization myths, Egyptian myths, that there's some superior, supreme person or even race beyond the human race. They just find it very hard to accept the inconceivable power and energy of the supreme person, that everything comes from such a powerful superior. And then they challenge him, why don't you do something about war? Why don't you do something about pestilence and famine? Things that they create. Things that they've created, human beings have created. I mean, even today, there'll be big charities, and they'll send a lot of money or a lot of food or a lot of clothing to some place, and then it gets, due to corruption, it gets mishandled and misused, and very little dwindles on down to the people it was meant for. And many of them advertise that 100% of what you collect will go to these orphans or will go to these poor people. And then you would have to do a check to see if it does, but it is a fact that the United States will send a lot of money to this country, and the politicians will pocket it all. Whatever suppliers that are middlemen that are meant to give it to the people, say they're supposed to construct them houses, they'll construct some cheap house and keep the rest of the money. Well, it's humans who create all this, and then they challenge God. Oh, if you're really there, supreme person, then come and fix this. But, they created the mess. They create the wars. They fight over resources. They don't fight. It's not like they're fighting over nothing. Sometimes they fight for just name and fame. You get some dictator in there, they want some fame, and so they take over the next insignificant country, establish their government there and, tax those people. But generally they're fighting over some resource, or they're fighting over some economic control. Well, they're fighting for a tax base. Most of the Muslim conquering of India, besides spreading Islam, that they thought would take them to heaven, but in reality they didn't just kill everyone, and although there may have been a lot of forced conversion, they didn't do that to everyone because they needed to maintain a tax base. These people are already civilized, they already pay. In our modern world, civilized means you're paying taxes to some government who can give you technological education to be a part of their economic scheme, to provide the consumers with products in some way or another. So anyhow, there was a tax base. These people they understood government, they paid taxes, they were, established merchants and farmers, and everything had some law and order behind it. And there was plenty of workers to do the jobs. So that, they simply gained control of the government and took the money for a tax base. And they didn't build it to maintain a wonderful infrastructure and make nice things for the people. Generally speaking, they made nice palaces for themselves and even tombs for their wives and heroes. But they used 90% of it for their military. Because all this fighting going on, they were paying people to do that fighting. The people wasn't doing it for nothing. I mean, the generals got rich. And, their officers made a lot of money. And the ordinary regular soldier made a living like that. So they were all mercenaries. And even when the British went there, they hired these mercenaries. So, India became, a place of lots of soldiers. And so there was so many fighting from 1000 AD until independence. And then, then there was still fighting amongst the, Hindus and Muslims, and, due to not just due to the separation, but just due to the same things they fight about now. You know, you know, besides religious doctrine, it's just so many animosities from the past. Prabhupada mentions how, you know, the British created a lot of this separation, but a lot of that separation was there, just like when India, when Hindus gained control of Indian government, you know, they passed legislation that places, you know, Hindu pilgrimage sites, great places, like the place where Ram was born, you know, which was desecrated by the Muslims, and a mosque built over it, should be returned to the Hindus. You know, their legislators and courts decided that that was fair. So then, you know, the Muslims will attack Hindus and Muslim populated countries where the Muslims are the vast majority, simply to retaliate. And it will spill over in India. And you know, when they kill some Hindus, then the Hindus will turn around and kill some Muslims. And so in this way it goes on and on and on. You know, this sort of stuff. But they blame it on God. It's God who creates the wars. Or is it humans who creates the wars? And then they want God to fix it, but they don't want to listen to God, and they don't even consider God a person, a lot of them. You know, it's very hard for them to believe in such a person with such inconceivable power that you can pray to and chant his names, and he can deliver you from all this misery and return you to a place where there is no misery, where there is a land where everything is pleasurable. Just to be there, you can't help but feel pleasure. Everything is full of pleasure. Our very own body, instead of being made up of molecules and atoms and elements that are constantly breaking down and can ultimately give us a feeling of pain, everything there gives a feeling of pleasure. Just being there, and breathing it and smelling it. The senses are all spiritual. The mind's spiritual. You don't need a car to go anywhere. You just go where your mind wants to go. All of this is described. Such a place exists. Why would such a powerful person have an inferior place where he has to always do maintenance? There the trees give you what you want. They're not ordinary trees. They give you what you want. And you know, and the cows, you don't have to go to a Dairy Queen to get some sort of treat. But the cows give this nectarine type of milk. And not only that, just like the trees, they can give you whatever you wish. So there is such a wonderful place, and there is such a wonderful person, but they either want to turn them into a myth, or they want to turn them into something impersonal, or they want to turn them into nothing. And so therefore Prabhupada came here to establish that no, he's something. He's something. You know, Krishna is something. He's the supreme person. And so it's a constant debate, you know, from Prabhupada to his disciples to people in general, to convince people, no, there is a supreme person. He's not a myth. He's not impersonal. He's not void. You just worship him and see. You just try. You just try to meditate on him. You just chant his names and see. You think it's difficult, you know, you've gotten yourself into a jam, you know, through drug addiction or through simply corruption. You know, you got, you know, the police are looking for you, or you know, your company's about ready to throw you out, or this or that. You know, well, just chant his names. You know, take his shelter. Have faith in him. You know, but most of the people in the world have faith in themselves, or they have faith in their family. Like I was talking to one devotee who was telling me about his previous life, and how, you know, this corruption that had happened where his father got off for a murder, And I said, well, what happened to the guy's fiancée? Why didn't she tell the truth? She saw it all. And he said, one mafia family to another. You know, anything can be done with money. So, you know, that's not in Krishna's world. You know, that sort of life. You know, that's only in this inferior creation of his that is meant for the satisfaction of living entities that want to exist without him, or they want to make him just a tool. He's a tool. You know, he's the Supreme Father even, but he's like the Supreme Father for like you are when you're 2 years old, when the Father may spoil you and give you what you want. So all he becomes is like a genie in a lantern, or a father that you just bag whatever you want from. And that's prayer. Oh God, give me this, or give me that, or give my children this, give my children that. You know, it's that type of God. But that's not when Krishna says, when Prabhupada says here that devotees, that Krishna chooses a devotee to become his father, it's not so that his father can beg for all sorts of material things. It's because his father loves him so much and tries to protect him in so many ways and will go out of his way to serve him in fatherly ways. And Krishna, being the greatest son, you know, he may ask his father for things, but he's not a materialist. He's just the supreme enjoyer. So ultimately he can protect his father, even when he convinces his father to do something that leads to universal gods retaliating against him. I mean, you know, you have a village, and if the village doesn't pay its taxes to the government, then the government removes the people who are in charge and puts somebody else in charge. It's like that even in America today. If you don't pay your taxes on your property, they give it to somebody else who will pay the tax. You can't keep that property. You may say, I bought something, I own it. But if you don't pay your taxes, they come and take it away from you and give it to somebody else who will pay the taxes. So the more you get, the higher the tax. And if you can't pay it, they're going to give it to somebody else who will pay it. In all Western so-called democratic countries, yeah, you elect the government, but the government is going to take your property if you don't pay the tax. Unless it's your brother and it's corrupt and somehow ever he cheats, but eventually your brother dies. And the government finds out, oh, you know, these taxes haven't been paid. And if you can't pay them, we're going to give it to somebody else who can pay it. And there's always somebody rich enough to take it. So, in the same way, in Vrindavan, they may have paid the government, but they would do some ritual or worship that pleased Indra, and Indra was giving them always perfect type of rainfall. Rain at night, not a big thunderstorm that would wash things away, make erosion and problems. Just nice so that the crops would grow, it would be cool, and maybe when the monsoons come, even in the hot season, it would be very pleasant. He was really taking care of them. But they would offer him some puja. And that was just tradition. It had always been like that. And Krishna convinces them not to do it one year, and instead worship him in the form of Govardhan Hill, which is really supplying all the grasses for our cows, which really provide our living for ourselves and the Brahmins and everyone else. That, you know, the Brahmins should you know, do this sacrifice for Govardhan Hill. And, you know, Govardhan Hill is providing everything. And Krishna wanted to do that just to establish that in Vrindavan, it's he who is worshipped and no one else. Not even Indra. So he was establishing that. So to establish that, it wasn't just a matter of it being done. And then the change happens without, you know, any great pastime. Oh, Krishna just established it, he changed it. No, there was a person that was being worshipped. And, he was attached to that worship because after all, he was taking care of these people. He was providing nice rainfall. He thought them to be honestly like his devotees. At least, at that time of year, they would all come and perform his puja. And so he became insulted. He was insulted. These meager human beings, they just, on the advice of the king's kid, goes off and worships Govardhan Hill, and he probably knew the history of Govardhan Hill to some extent. I mean, he'd been around for a while. He said, and tells them to worship Govardhan Hill because it's providing grass for their cows. Doesn't he know what my rain provides? Without my rain, none of them live. And not only that, if my rain, becomes furious, none of them live. So he felt they needed to be punished for, having faith in the words of a kid over the tradition that had been established by ages of Vedic worship. I mean, performed by bona fide Brahmins. It was traditional that Indra be worshipped for what he has done for us. Even recognized as the servant of Vishnu. Still he was Indra, great devotee of the Lord, the celestial king, protecting the universe. He should be worshipped. He's providing us the rain. But Krishna, with his ability to persuade, influenced them. Like he did that to one demon. He influenced the demon to get to use the benediction he had to kill people against his very own self. Krishna convinced him. Take that benediction and see if it really works. He convinced them that it was a foolish benediction that really had no power. And the person used it against himself, and the benediction worked, and the demon died. So Krishna, with the same influence, convinced his father and all the cowherd people and Brahmins to worship Govardhan Hill. So Indra was very insulted, and he attacked them, or he punished them. It's better to use the word punish, because it really wasn't a military war. They were just cowherd people. They weren't going to put up a fight against him. So it was a punishment. And he came at, worse than Katrina and all these hurricanes put together. The people were suffering, and they were about to die. The people and all the animals, Vrindavan was going to be obliterated from the face of the earth. Just like after a huge volcano would pour its lava over everything. So at that time, Krishna approved that he was supreme, and that his word was bona fide and superior. That's when he lifted the great Govardhan Hill as an umbrella and provided for everybody underneath. And when Indra, after 7 days of trying to devastate Krishna and Govardhan Hill, gave up and recognized Krishna as supreme. This must be my Lord Vishnu and his incarnation of Krishna. It was very difficult to recognize him because after all, he's just playing as a cowherd boy. And it's not unusual to see popular kids in the world. There's popular kids in the world today. There's all kinds of heroes and people who have a karma that makes them greatly popular because of some abilities that they have, some charisma that they have. So even today we see people like that. So he just thought of Krishna as an ordinary human being with some great karma, some great popularity. Very fortunate, the son of the king of the cowherd people. But he didn't think of him as an incarnation of Vishnu or as even Vishnu's superior. So, but he did after that 7 days, and he comes down and he offers those wonderful prayers to Krishna and bathes Krishna with the water from the trunk of his elephant carried. So, to convince people that Krishna is so great, Prabhupada gave his blood, sweat, and tears. He to some degree, he didn't have success in India. People knew Krishna. They know Krishna today. That's a standard thing when you go to sell a Bhagavad Gita. I know Bhagavad Gita. I know Krishna. then if you know Bhagavad Gita and Krishna, then you should buy this Gita because you know how much piety it will bring you. You know, even though you may have, you should purchase because the Gita is coming to you and you can't ignore it. So we have to convince them in a different way, you know, because they have some devotion or some knowledge about it, some faith. But, you know, people in the West, we didn't have that. And, you know, Prabhupada had to give his blood, sweat, and tears to convince us, even of the philosophy of the Gita, and then with the speak of, you know, that person who spoke it. That's, you know, he called it Bhagavad Gita as it is, because most of the interpretations of the Gita in the Western world were all impersonal. So Prabhupada had to defeat those impersonal Gitas. No, it's Krishna's the supreme person. Not that he's some figment of the imagination and he's actually the God within all others, and you know, Kurukshetra is the body. And you know, no, these things were real. There was a Kurukshetra, and there was a Kurukshetra war, and there was Krishna, and there was his disciple Arjuna. And he's telling Arjuna to fix his mind upon the supreme person while doing his work, and he'll attain perfection. So Prabhupada had to convince everybody about that. You know, in his writings, where we passed out his books, people would read him. Some people would come convinced, others, you know, wouldn't. So it was a great job. It was a great labor. It was a great work. It was a great sacrifice that, you know, Prabhupada has become renowned for, taking the Krishna consciousness movement to the Western world, where now it's somewhat established, but there's just still so much pioneer work to go on to make it strong. Otherwise, things will just fade out. You know, Prabhupada's gone, his disciples are gone. Soon his disciples will be gone. And then you have a few Indians in the Western world, and at any time things can change politically, and they may run them all out. You never know what will happen politically. You know, it's strange, you know, what can happen, especially in Kali Yuga. So to establish it, you know, is still we must go on. Like Prabhupada, making it stronger and stronger and stronger all over the world. It's an international. So it's getting late, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And it's like the rain is back. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.